All right. Logie asks, a lot of people think they want to start a podcast and talk with friends about stuff they like. Talk about that process. Why should we start a podcast? Why shouldn't we? Ooh, that's a very good question. Um, so I can say I've done this myself. I have something I'm like, yes, I think this would be really cool. And then I want to be, doing this podcast and I've started it. And then I realized, yeah, maybe this is not, maybe this is not what I want to do. One thing I do suggest is, at least for me, one thing I've noticed is trying to do a solo podcast versus doing a podcast with one or two other people. There's challenges with both. For me, the biggest challenge with trying to do a solo podcast, which tend to be the ones that I end up not doing very well with, is that everything is on me, right? Creating my schedule, keeping up with all of it, the social media aspect, the posting things, the actual recording, uploading this stuff. If I want to do a video part, then I have to think about that. And that's all my responsibility. I have to take care of all of it. And sometimes with everything else that I have going on, it felt like it was just a little bit too much. It was a little bit too overwhelming. Whereas when you have other people, sometimes you can split the work up or you can rely on them. For example, one of the podcasts, we have one person who does all of the editing the audio together and uploading. One of the other podcasts, one person is in charge of the audio stuff. They edit the audio together, put in, all of the sounds, and then I do the uploading it so that it actually goes out to people. And I'm more the social media aspect. So like running the Twitter account, which also leans into our strengths. I am not as good at like the adding the music and the audio sounds and things like that. So splitting it up between multiple people makes it a lot easier. And especially if you have different strengths, lean into those is what I would say. So going like maybe why you should start a podcast or why you shouldn't, that's really more on you. You probably shouldn't if you're already really kind of lacking on time in a schedule. So depending on how you'd want to, if you'd want to do it every week, every 2 weeks, once a month, you'd have to really consider that and see if you actually have the time for it. Because if you're not going to have the time to put in that work behind the scenes, you probably shouldn't do it. And if you don't really have solid ideas going into it, you probably shouldn't start it as well. I would work on more of the back end and really work on setting up what your ideas are going to look like before starting it, because that was another thing that I learned from my failure. I had just the initial idea, and then I gung-ho was like, all right, let's go. I'm going to start this. And then I realized I probably didn't do enough planning before this. And now I'm realizing I maybe don't have enough content, or maybe I don't really want to reach out to people because I get nervous about that sometimes. And that was, I did 2 episodes with that, but it was a confidence through gaming podcast. So it was talking to other gamers about how they got confidence, through gaming, what ways gaming helped them gain confidence in themselves and just their personal life. So the idea I think is great, but also the fact that I didn't really plan very well. I'm like, how am I going to reach out to people? How often do I need to do that to actually try to get interviews scheduled? It just wasn't fleshed out enough. And then it kind of felt overwhelming. So I ended up not doing it anymore. Ooh, also relating to this, Wicked Good says, so it depends on if everything is on me is a positive or negative. That is absolutely true. Yeah. After doing podcasts with multiple hosts for a few years, being able to just do what I want when I want with Off Curve, it was pretty freeing. Yeah. This is definitely true as well. So that's why it's a consideration of what works for you. And it sounds like a cop-out answer, and I'm probably going to use that for a lot of the questions, but my journey the last year and a half especially has absolutely been find what works for you, because if you find something that works for you, you're going to use it. If you struggle with it, if you don't understand how to use it, if you're trying to use it the same way somebody else does and it's just overwhelming or it's not working, you're just going to get frustrated and you're not going to do it, right? It's not going to work. So you have to find ways with all of this. The calendar that I showed you, some people are very good with using online calendars or calendars in their phone and things like that. I just forget. When I set alarms, I have a very bad habit of just turning the alarm off and then forgetting about whatever it was that I just had the alarm set for instead of doing it. So for me, that doesn't work as well as it might for other people. Same thing with these podcasts, right? It's finding what works. So if you want to try it, try it. Try a couple, even if you never post them, try recording some. Record 2 or 3 and then post them if you want to. But just see how it goes, see how it feels, and try it out. Logie says, how do you balance scripting content for podcasts and the fun improv nature of people chatting? So again, this will vary on whether it's a solo podcast, just what works for you, and if you're in a group, what works best for the group. I will say I'll take my 2 because we're actually very different. So for Dr. 3, we usually have more of an outlined script. We have Major Death, who usually finds all of the news related stuff, and then we just like read through the news bullets. We might do a little bit of kind of, off points, chit chat and stuff between the points, but for the most part, that's pretty scripted. And then we might be a little bit more free flowing during our main topic because it's usually more of a conversational thing. We're sharing our specific thoughts. So that breakdown is like the news pieces are pretty scripted, and maybe tournament points. We at least have like bullet points when I talk about that. And then our main topic, we might have some questions or some, bullet points there, but that's more of a little bit more improv. Now for the Mercenaries podcast, we are very much more, we really like to just bounce off of what the others are saying and kind of have a more natural flowing conversation. So for us, that works. We tend to have just a couple of main talking point type of bullet points in a notes. And then I just like copy the entire show notes over because it doesn't have very many bullet points. So it's just very vague. And then what we say comes out in just what we want to say. So that's just going to vary on the people and what kind of content you're doing as well. Is the content lending itself more to having a scripted thing? So maybe for the sake of like our standard podcast, when we do more in-depth, deep dive kind of main topics, like let's say we're talking about a deck, we have bullet points listed for, okay, let's talk about mulligan, and then general mulligan, aggro, control, like the matchups. Then we'll go into matchups and we'll talk about, okay, what are good matchups? What are bad matchups? That we actually have pretty detailed bullet points on that. And then we just talk about it. When we have more of a, like, how do you feel about the new meta? What are you seeing in the new meta? Those are more vague, and we just let more natural conversation happen during those topics. So I would also say when you're scripting things like that, look at what the content is. Is it a very specified, like, does it need those bullet points? Does it need to have that very detailed information? Or is it more of a what we think, how we feel? And then you can lend yourself a little bit more towards just a vague bullet point for direction, and then be a little bit more impromptu off of that.